Good evening. My name is Bob Anderson. I'm the Vice President of the Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association, also the Transportation Chair. So we're very pleased to see you on this Zoom meeting where we're going to have LA SkyRail Express present about 30 minutes of information in a presentation about their monorail concepts that they are designing for Metro. And I'll introduce the people. We have Michael Bukui, who is the project manager for the SkyRail project. Gerard Kutchian, who is a design manager. Marie Campbell, who's the environmental manager. Mark Wire, who's the stakeholder outreach. And Mei Song, who's a research associate helping them. And she's going to USC right now, so that's exciting for her. And then from Metro, we have Nikhil Damle, who you can't see. He's checking on one other Metro person that may or may not be able to sign in. Maybe her link didn't work or something. And then from our organization, we also have Maria Calvin, who is also a vice president of the Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association, and Jeff Calvin, and yes, they are related. They're husband and wife. And Jeff is the member of the Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council Board. He's the chair of the Planning and Land Use Committee, and he is also the chair of the Vision Committee, which is a great committee because it has really good members, including myself and Jeff and Maria. So, and we're studying some transportation issues right now, so it's all a good fit. And I think right now we'll just get going. We're going to go for about 30 minutes with the presentation. If you start to have questions on the presentation, you can type them into the Q&A box, which you'll see. We're not going to answer those questions till after the presentation's over, but you can put them in there, or at the end of the presentation, you can use the raised hand function that's, at least on my computer, down at the bottom. And you can click on that, and then we'll call on people. But it's going to be easier for us if we have a lot of questions to put them in the Q&A box. And before we open it to audience questions, I'm going to see if Jeff and Maria have any questions for that. So, Michael, do you want to kick off, and Mark start the charts up, and we'll see where we are.
Happy to do that. Mark will be guiding us through the presentation in terms of handing it to me or Gerard or the rest of our folks from Laser. So Mark, could you please get us started?
Absolutely. So first off, on behalf of the entire SkyRail team, we just want to thank the Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association for coordinating this evening and allowing us to present. Again, thank you, Bob, for hosting and pulling us all together. And we know how much work these are. So as Bob mentioned, I'm Mark Wire. I lead the stakeholder outreach for the SkyRail project. I've been working in transit for nearly 20 years. I've worked at Metrolink and was the director of communications at LAX for the People Mover project. And I'm really excited to be with you all today to kick off this presentation for this critical mass transit project in Southern California. So we are currently going through an environmental review phase with Metro for this project. And so in this phase, we're conducting stakeholder outreach to organizations like yours, neighborhood councils, and other stakeholders that have an interest in this corridor. So because we're in this environmental review phase, nothing has been formally approved. And so Metro has asked that we begin by sharing this disclaimer. So I'm going to turn it over to Iman Smith to read this disclaimer. So Iman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
Before the presentation begins, Metro does require that we read this disclaimer. And I'm here in an observational capacity, so I will read this disclaimer and then I'll sign off, or I'll be quiet in the background listening. Because Metro has not completed a CEQA review, the information contained herein does not constitute or evidence an approval by Metro of or commitment of Metro to any action for which prior environmental review is required under CEQA, and that's the California Environmental Quality Act. Metro retains absolute sole discretion to make decisions under CEQA, which discretion includes, without limitation, 1, deciding not to proceed with the project, known as a no-build alternative, and 2, deciding to approve the project. There will be no approval or commitment by Metro regarding the development of the project unless and until Metro, as the lead agency, and based upon information resulting from the CEQA environmental review process, considers the impacts of the project. And if you would like to receive or find out more information about the project, Metro does have a website. It's www.metro.net/projects, and you can go to Sepulveda Corridor. Thank you. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Iman. So now to get started here, this is what we plan on doing this evening. My colleagues and I will cover a brief background on the project. Then we're going to discuss some monorail capabilities. We're going to spend the majority of our time on 3 alignments and some stations. And then we're going to answer any questions that you all have. So jumping right into this, I'm going to first provide everyone with a brief background on this project. So for those of you that are new to Los Angeles, this project has roots that date back to 1974. So as you can see from this map on the bottom left-hand corner, this was a concept of what the Sepulveda Pass would look like, the Sepulveda Pass corridor would look like on a regional map. Transit planners, they saw the need for this back in 1974, but the project lacked funding. It wasn't until 2008 when Measure R passed that seed funding was provided for this to study this alignment. But things really changed in 2016 when the voters of LA County passed Measure M, which provided $5.6 billion for this project. So this particular project, it was the signature piece of that measure that would finally connect the West Los Angeles with the Valley and eventually the airport. So with that background, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Halgugi, our project manager, to dive into some details. Michael.
Thank you very much, Mark. And as Mark said, we are delighted to be here in this presentation for the Sherman Oaks HOA. And thank you for your time and attention that you're giving to this important project. I'll try to smile, as my wife frequently tells me, so I'm not coming across as too serious. But these projects are very serious for LA and for our team. This is part of the legacy that we could be leaving behind for literally a century to come. So if you see our intensity in this presentation, I hope you can understand it's really coming from the angle of public service, the way we see our roles, that hopefully will execute to that capacity to the best of our abilities. So first, let me talk to you about our team. We have a consortium. In any project of this magnitude, you have a group of companies. No individual single company can do this thing. So I'll start in no particular order, just the way this slide is put together. Skanska, who's been building programs and transit projects in California and the rest of the US for a long time, very familiar with the nature and the character of the city. Keolis, who I'm proud to have brought into this program as our O&M partner. They operate well in excess of 400 driverless systems all over the globe, including many projects in North America. We have Gensler as our architect, and you will be seeing the masterpieces that they've created for the station concepts that we have, and hopefully you'll be seeing more of those. BYD Ride is the vehicle and systems technology provider. John Lang and BYD are the members of the equity team. The SPV for this P3 project is shouldered by these two companies. John Lang is on the investment side and BYD on the system side. And last and not the least is the HDR, who is the principal designer for the program. Again, with significant expertise and experience in LA. We have a number of DBEs, the disadvantaged business entities that are involved, too numerous to mention here, but we'll be happy to provide that if there's an interest. And we have other sub-consultants that have done these kind of projects, particularly on the monorail side for a number of internationally and well-known projects, such as Innova and others. I will also add that I am delighted, and I cannot say this enough, to have such an amazing team with us in this program. These things don't happen regularly. When they happen, often they don't sustain. And we've had the pleasure of having a team that's been operating really on all 8 cylinders since the inception of this PDA program. And I can never give them enough credit to tell them how much I appreciate it. So I hope the labor of their work and the energy they're putting into it comes across to you in the alignments that we've designed. Next slide, please, Mark. Here I will ask my colleague, Marie Campbell from SAFOS, to join in and kind of walk us through this slide. There's a lot of information here. Marie is our environmental specialist. So Marie, if you could walk us through this slide, please.
Thank you so much, Michael, for giving me this opportunity to share some information. So it may be a bit of a repeat for some of you who've been tracking through the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project from the beginning, but just to make sure we're all in the same place, I want to give you just a broad perspective about how the process works, primarily how the engineering and the environmental analysis come together. So there's an early planning phase, which has been just recently completed, which involves scoping. So some of you who've been tracking probably participated in the scoping process. It's an opportunity to really begin the spirit of what the California Environmental Quality Act is all about, which is to provide for more transparent decision-making and to have the public be fully informed about the information that will be considered ultimately by Metro as they consider what's the best option for the community. So thank you all for being here and participating this evening, because it's a critical part of the process to give the public an opportunity to understand how the planning is progressing. So where we're at, and sometimes I think from externally can seem like a long process, but it is, when you're looking at a major capital improvement of this nature, it's really important for the engineering information and the environmental information to come together so that Metro has an opportunity to make a fully informed decision. Right now, we're in a process where Metro's consultant is in the process of preparing a draft environmental impact report that's going to be released for public review. And all of you who've asked to have an opportunity to comment on that document will have an opportunity to do so. To prepare that environmental impact report requires the development of numerous technical studies, both on the engineering side and on the environmental side. So those technical studies are currently under preparation, and it involves a process where Metro is reaching out to the laser team and the other teams to get information about their particular designs, the footprint that'll be required to build and construct and operate that design, and then the environmental consequences that are anticipated. All of that information, as Aman so eloquently shared with us earlier, then has to be independently reviewed by Metro. That information then will ultimately be highlighted in the draft environmental document that will be released for public review. And then that'll serve as the basis for Metro Board identifying the LPA or the locally preferred alternative. Once that's done, all of the comments that all of you provide during the process will be integrated and addressed, and a final environmental impact report will be prepared. It's anticipated that there may be federal funding for this project. And so at that point that the LPA is identified, then the Metro will also engage with preparing a document under the Federal National Environmental Policy Act. Both of those documents can come together for a final, and then a record of decision will be made. So thank you again for participating. If there's more specific questions later, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Marie. You do it amazingly well. And by the way, Marie is sort of my analyst from time to time, because she calms me down when the environmental process goes slower or compared to what I had in mind. So thank you for that, Marie. Next slide, please, Mark. This topic comes up quite a bit, so allow me to spend a minute on this one. Monorails, or you might hear MRTs, monorail rapid transit, have been around for a long time. They've been in operation in Japan for at least 60 years. The modern monorails, where I kind of credit the Japanese networks as a start, have been operating in highly seismic environment like Tokyo and Osaka and other places, similar to what we might anticipate in California. And I think their seismic characteristics are probably surpassing what we see in Southern California anyway. But they've been around. I'm frequently also reminded of the Disney monorail and all that. And that they have been very reliable, regardless of how they are perceived. The reality is that modern monorails today are doing some of the heavy lifting for passenger capacity around the globe. I've given previously citations of where those projects are. Cairo monorail is designed for 45,000 passengers per hour per direction. So that means 90,000 passengers in a given hour could be moved around Bangkok. They have two lines, pink and yellow line, designed for 48,000 passengers per hour. Sao Paulo line 15, that is designed for, I believe it's around 36,000 passengers per hour per direction. And they really cover a broad range. They can do anything from 2,000 to 3,000 pph/PD all the way to nearly 50,000. And after that, really heavy metro, not the HRT term that we hear in LA, heavy metro as in what they use in Mecca project, where they move around 1 million people in a course of about 6 hours. Those are heavy capacity metro. So there is a place for any of these technologies. And what Metro has done, to their credit, and this is before I got here, so I cannot take any credit, but I can acknowledge the genius that Metro brought in, that they've designed a program for the Sepulveda that leverages a PDA environment, pre-development agreement. It's very innovative. I've not seen it elsewhere. I've seen a lot of innovation in other projects overseas where I've had about 20 years of transit experience, but PDA is unique. And to Metro's credit, they've executed it very well. They've effectively stated performance requirements as opposed to prescribing a particular technology. That is unique, and that's really why we are here, because that has opened the door for various competing teams to come in and showcase what they can offer. About the other PDA team. We are offering the monorail, which is very unique for densely developed urban environment, where the area is grown very densely in terms of city planning, or arguably tongue-in-cheek, lack thereof. So there are areas in cities like LA, like Cairo, like Bangkok, that the corridors were not envisaged, or if they were not preserved. So monorails are designed to be able to negotiate tight turning curves, meaning curves that are in the category of around 46 meters in radius. So the other technologies that we have for public transit are not able to do that. This is the singular most differentiating benefit that the MRT brings. That's why we are here. So that comes at a cost. There are trade-offs for it. So they make it well worth that decision in terms of coping with the tighter curves at the cost of slower travel time, but you're able to insert that into the urban fabric. So uniquely in a LA environment, we're able to do this, and we've come up with 3 alternatives that my colleague will talk about later, that are particularly driven in terms of how we service UCLA. That is one of the toughest areas in terms of how it's grown and how it's been developed. We'll talk about those details. the particularities of what the PDA required in terms of initially asking for 12,000 passengers per hour per direction. That gave us the genesis of a 6-car initially, ultimately 8-car consist for the vehicles, traveling down to as short as 2-minute headways during the peak hours. The technology actually, it's all driverless. It can cope with down to 60-second, 1-minute headway, but we don't operate it because the demand isn't there for that kind of a performance. Later, we've been informed by Metro that the passenger and the ridership catchment is less than the 12,000 that initially was in the tender. So we will be adjusting the train sizes and the headways to cope with whatever the demand is on the initial year as well as the horizon year. So when you look at our vehicles, they're typically the passengers per vehicle in a very comfortable AW2, meaning 4 passengers per square meter. These are technical terms for the transit. You get about 100 passengers per car, and you can kind of play with that number. How many cars you put together, depending on what's the ultimate capacity that you wish to achieve. And you can kind of play with that to come up with the sweet spot. Today, our stations are designed to cope with a train that is 8-car in length. So we would shorten those stations because the demand is not there. 8-car trains would give you very comfortably 24,080 passengers per hour per direction. So the demand is about 5th or 6th of that. So that's why we are entertaining to initially start with 4 cars and ultimately 6 cars when the phase 2 to LAX begins to get constructed. Next slide, please. With the aerial alignment, again, this is driven by a number of factors. One of them is the construction time. You can build these things much faster, and they cost less for the same performance. And obviously, they have to meet all the safety and safety certification requirements. So these would be subject to the same rail standards and eventually the independent safety assessor that would have to bless this project before it goes to revenue service. So they're very light structures, as the previous slide indicated. They're about the third of the material in terms of concrete, steel, et cetera, that you would need for a traditional viaduct. So these guideways are basically composed of the foundation, which is the piling, the column that goes on top of that foundation and supports the guideway beams that the trains run on. There is no track, there's no other configurations. We have obviously this service and safety walkways, emergency walkways and things like that, but much lighter structure, much faster to construct. Are modular precast elements that can be put together literally like a Lego block, if you will. And I don't mean that to be diminishing. It's a beauty that the design elegance that brings here. And we have overall 8 stations that cover this 15-mile alignment. Our alignment actually with the 3 option varies that Gerard is going to be talking somewhere between 15 and 16 miles. And he'll get into the particularities of that. Obviously, we have a depot on the northern bound, the OMSF, Operation, Maintenance, and Service Facility. And there's a bus maintenance for Alternative 1 to service the electric buses that we would be operating for Alternative 1. So predominantly, the 3 alignments are going to be different with respect to the area that's around UCLA. Again, I think that's coming up in the next slide. I'll let Jorah talk about that.
Okay,
Next.
thank you. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, thanks for the introduction there. So as Michael said, there's 3 alternatives that the monorail options are studying. We're 3 of the total of 6 alternatives that Metro is studying for this corridor, with a combination of monorail for alternatives named 1, 2, and 3, and then the heavy rail alternatives 4, 5, and 6. So we're focusing here today on the 3 monorail alternatives. And just to, as Michael said, and that this is phase 1 of the Sepulveda Transit Corridor. This is from the northern terminus at the Van Nuys Metrolink station to the north. You can see in the map to the left. And then the southern terminus is for this phase 1 of the Sepulveda Transit Corridor is the Expo station or Expo line and the transfer there as well. So the three alternatives, as Michael said, is they defer really the connection to UCLA. As far as the majority of the route is exactly the same. What we've proposed to do is really take advantage of the 405 corridor, which is an existing transportation corridor, and utilize that as the background for us. We provide that guideway through both the Caltrans right away and off to the side. In this first alternative, as Michael said, is about 15 miles. We have 8 stations for this alternative and also a Getty station that's not reflected in the heavy rail option. So there's an additional station there. We stay predominantly within the freeway or on the edge of the freeway, and all stations are either to the left or right of the freeway. There are no stations in the middle of the freeway. All stations are to the side, where that facilitates connection to other modes as far as bike, transit, bus, and connects also to the Metrolink line, the Orange line, the Purple line, and also the Expo line as well. So facilitates those direct transfers and connections as well. So that's 7 stations within the 405 corridor, again, off to the side, and the stations can either be open or closed, depending on, that's a decision that, we'll make with Metro as we advance the project forward. And the first alternative here, if you look at the inset, provides, this is what we call the base alternative that provides the lowest cost alternative, and that provides a e-bus connection, direct service to UCLA with a intermediate stop in Westwood to serve the Reagan Hospital and all the commercial businesses in that area. So this is a dedicated bus service from the Purple Line station that's currently under construction by Metro. So we have that direct transfer to the Purple Line system, but also a bus transfer to UCLA as well through various routes. And we have, the OMSFs. There's 2 sites proposed in the northern limits that we call them site A and F. We'll only select one based on the availability of the site as well. So we can go to alternative 2. Thanks, Mark. Alternative 2 is very similar in the general alignment with the northern terminus and the southern terminus and the stations. What we do in this alternative is, this was an alternative that we initiated in the scoping process to see how we can find a range of alternatives and ways to connect to UCLA. So the first alternative was a bus connection. Here we looked at an alternative that is an underground automated people mover, very similar to what's being constructed at LAX. Obviously LAX is an elevated people mover. This would be an underground, but we looked at above ground. We looked at various different tunnel configurations. I would say we pretty much exhausted every way to connect to UCLA in, I would say, probably 20 or plus versions of this alternative to see how best we can connect to UCLA, service UCLA in the surrounding areas, which is a large transportation or employment location, but also minimize our impacts, our environmental impacts, our community impacts as much as possible. So again, this was an alternative that we vetted through really the phase 2 of the PDA process. And this included 8 proposed monorail stations again, but what we call was a Sky Shuttle system, the automated people mover system, but very similar. You can see the graphic on the bottom of what the vehicle looks like, but it looks very similar to the monorail itself. However, based on all of the studies that we advanced to date, this is an alternative that we propose to Metro not to advance any further. And if you go to the next slide, thanks, Mark. Just some notes on that of why, like I said, this was an alternative we initiated in 2021 as part of the scoping process. And we really vetted this exhaustively to see if we could make it work from a impacts, a cost, a functionality perspective. And it was one that we decided collectively based on thorough evaluation that we would propose to Metro not to advance any further beyond this phase, beyond phase 2. So this is one that we're working with Metro to removed from further consideration going forward. And we can take more questions on that in the Q&A. The next alternative, Mark, if we go to the next slide, is alternative 3. This alternative, again, is very similar until you get from the north until you get to the Getty. From the Getty, instead of going down the 405 corridor, we go in an eastern configuration in a 3.5-mile tunnel that would serve UCLA directly with an underground station. And we've got an image later on in the presentation show you how that station looks like. So we would connect to UCLA with a single seat connection to UCLA with an underground station. The tunnel would continue through mostly public right-of-way going, under a few buildings into the Wilshire corridor, where we have another underground station that would provide a direct transfer to the Purple Line as well. So in this alternative, we have a total of 9 stations, 2 underground at the Metro Purple Line and also at UCLA, and notwithstanding the additional Getty station that alternatives 1 through 3 provide as well. So you can see the tunnel configuration there. We would have very similar monorail maintenance facilities in the northern part of the project. But again, in order to study a range of alternatives, we looked at a tunnel configuration that would service UCLA with a single seat ride as well. Again, very similar in this about 15 to 60 mile alignment. So this is a concept of the UCLA station. This is an early concept. We're developing renderings for the environmental process, but just to orient everybody, this is looking southwest from the Luskin Center. That's where the current transit stops are for UCLA. You can see the commercial in the background. So we would propose an underground station with the monorail coming in and providing, the platform, a mezzanine level, and going up to ground level as well with various configurations. All the stations are all modern stations, meeting all ADA requirements, all of Metro's design criteria and guidance on stations. So they're very, similar to a lot of the stations, but we also want to make these attractive locations and, to attract riders and have a safe and system as well that everybody can utilize. If you go to next station, next slide. So this is the Stat 1 station that I mentioned on the Wilshire corridor. This would be on the lot 36, if you're familiar with the UCLA campus in that proximity. Just to orient everybody, the darker is the monorail station and below it, and then the gray shaded area is the current Purple Line tunnel that is under construction. So we would go below that, and we would have all the vertical circulation elements to get to ground level. And this way, you can see, would provide a direct transfer to Purple Line as well. So this is some of the early concepts we were looking at as well to evaluate it. So again, a monorail system, and it would continue on. Eventually, it would resurface along the 405 and continue down to the Expo station as well. Next slide, please. This one is some early rendering of this is the Van Nuys Metrolink station. We were looking at different configurations for the station. This is one directly above Van Nuys Boulevard. We subsequently have moved this above the Metrolink station itself and integrating it with the Metrolink and Amtrak. But you can see some of the modern concepts with the canopies and roofs. Again, the train stations, the monorail stations have an option of being either open air stations or closed. That is something we'll evaluate in future phases, but the monorail stations give that opportunity to be flexible. Again, providing direct transfer to many of those east-west and north-south existing corridors, and also providing access pedestrian, bikes, the bus system, and providing those direct transfers as well. Thanks, Mark. We go to the next slide. So again, very similar. You can see some of the station concepts, interiors on the bottom 2 slides are pictures. One is a view of inside what a monorail station will look like. Again, safety and consideration, we would have full height glass walls that would, open and close as the monorail comes into the station and leaves the station. These are open air concepts with plenty of light and really attractive stations to be able to utilize and ride the system as well, and really encourage people to come off the freeway, the 405, and be able to ride the transit. And the image on the right is some of the early renderings for the UCLA station, how that could look like, and a vertical circulation elements coming into a very modern system as well. And then the larger image is a typical monorail station. As you can see, the guide beams, the roof canopies, and again, it's a multi-level with a ground, the mezzanine level as well. So next slide, please. And lastly, I'll turn it over to Michael to discuss some of our advantages of connecting to the Getty.
Thank you very much, Gerard. The monorail, as Gerard mentioned, all our three alignments have a Getty stop, as in any city like LA with all the cultural iconic locations such as Getty. We would be remiss if we didn't propose a station for them. The ridership and the visitors demand public transit. And again, the decision ultimately will be up to Metro and the decision makers that select the LPA. But we have that stop for Getty that we've been advocating for obvious reasons. And that's part of and parcel of that travel time that we invariably get as a question. So every time you have a stop, every time you have a tight curve, et cetera, that affects your travel time. But our focus has been more than just paying attention to travel time. That's a very important factor. It's the guiding principle for my team, with all the pride I can take in that, is the journey experience. What is that travel experience for the passengers? And we have put all the energy in terms of making that journey experience a very positive one. We are effectively aspiring to change the travel experience in LA with public transit. So imagine floating above the city, free from the traffic, and having a transit mode that effectively gives you access and gives you a visual stimulation for all the beautiful places that this great city has to offer. It also advertises for itself. When you're stuck in traffic and you see a monorail zooming by every 2 minutes, it doesn't take long before you kind of get curious and you want to give up the car and the hassle of the traffic to get on that. So there's a lot of benefits. The station layouts, the way we are constructing this, again, I don't take this lightly. We have that charter to really transform the journey experience and give a much more delightful, pleasant, safe, and secure passenger experience. I talked about earlier about the construction time. These are all referenceable in terms of you can compare. Again, LA has its own peculiarities. No two cities are ever exactly alike. But because of the configuration of these precast guideway beams, and this photo shows a guideway beam being lifted onto place on top of the pier caps, is that they're typically around 80 to 100 feet long. So we could be lifting at least 6 to 10 guideway beams each night. So we're not going to be taking down the traffic lanes on 405. Literally, you can get a progress rate of, with this kind of scenario, of around 1,000 linear feet per day or per night, depending on when you're installing these things. In the alternative 3, for example, purely as a contrast, for that 3-mile tunnel that we have, with the state-of-the-art tunnel boring machines, the best we can expect to get is around 50 feet per day. And that is assuming we don't have any geotechnical issues and there's no other complications with this, which is not usually the case. So that 3 miles will take probably as long or longer to build the rest of the elevated alignment that we're showing here. So just purely as a point of reference and contrast in terms of what we're talking about. The other benefit is that because we can build opportunistically on any available site along our alignment, if there is an issue with a utility or what have you, we could have crews that are doing construction concurrently on multiple segments. So theoretically, again, for a 15-mile alignment, you can have 15 crews that each one is tasked to build a mile. And with the progress rates that I shared with you, you can kind of, again, put a mental map in terms of how quickly the construction of the line will be. The stations will take a little bit longer, but not significantly longer than anything that you're used to in a sort of an elevated structure that you would see. Even the stations have a lot of prefabricated, precast elements that would be going into place, and even those are going to be faster. And again, the schedules that we've given Metro very conservatively show a very different construction experience, I'm sure, than any other projects that we've done in this area. Next slide, please. So these are just giving you some impressions or views of what the alignment would look like. Very, I'll call it transparent. They're not obstructive in terms of the views. And effectively, the passengers have a bird's eye view of the surroundings as they travel through this corridor. The trains also have a lot of features. I didn't talk about that. They are open end to end internally, so the passengers can level load the train on their own. If they wish to move from one car to another, there's no obstructions. They can move through that. And that's, again, a different kind of passenger experience than what we have with the current trains in LA that we see. Lots of safety features, from fire suppression, fire mist inside the vehicles. Again, battery backup, so the train, even in the case of a power failure, can move from one station to another and continue the operation and really get the passengers to where they want to go, even in a degraded mode. Next slide, please. That brings us to an end on this discussion, so we'll be happy to take any questions, Bob.
Thank you, Michael. Now we're all back. We've gotten 9 questions so far, and I think we're going to get some more. So first I'll ask, I see Jeff's got his hand raised. I want to make one comment, sort of more than a question. I know that you and Gerard stated that you're no longer pursuing Alternative 2, which I'm very sad about, because the Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association endorsed it about 3 weeks before Metro ever made their announcement that they're not going to pursue it anymore. And the reason we endorsed it, so that people understand, because a lot of people don't understand why we've done these things. One of our key criteria for this project is that Metro be able to afford it within the budget that they have from Measure M. This project, like all Measure M projects, has a budget that was included in the measure that voters voted on. And so it's sort of a publicly approved budget that was developed by Metro. And in today's dollars, that's about $8 billion in budget available. The monorail is the only one that can meet that budget. And I think that's critical, because other options could cost up to $20 billion more. And with the state in the very bad budget situation that it is in, and with the federal government cutting back on transportation transit funding, it's going to be difficult to find $5 billion more, much less 20. And so we looked at the monorail concepts, and 1 and 2 are, to us, the most affordable. We chose 2 over 1 because we thought it had a connection that UCLA would like better. And I know Michael Beck at UCLA wants to have the best he can. We met him at an earlier meeting and discussed this. I'm sorry to see that Alternative 2 goes away, which means Alternative 1 is sort of all that's left. Alternative 3 is going to cost more, but maybe Metro could dig up the money for that. But I wanted to clarify that Because a lot of people say we're, SOHA, Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association, is doing this, that, or the other thing. And that was the reasoning behind it. There are some other things that will get in there. We're already getting quite a few questions. So what I'm going to do is, Jeff, will have you give yours. Maria, if you have any, we'll have you next. And then I'm going to read the questions, because taking people in and out of Zoom to have them read their question just adds time, and I'd rather get more questions responded to in the time that we have. I was hoping we could end around 8:30, 8:45. I think that'd be the best way to do it. So Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you, Bob. The presentation was very nice. Thank you, SkyRail. Two questions. When you do construction, the environmental impact is really greatest during construction. And you have, from your presentation, the construction process is much quicker than any of the more standard heavy rail subway construction. So in your environmental impact report, Marie, did that show up considerably as the strength of your project, of your proposal?
Jeff, thank you for that question. I think that's an excellent question, and it really helps, highlight why the CEQA process is so important to help inform the decision-making process. And so, yes, that is one of the components that each of the teams is required to demonstrate the construction schedule. And then that construction schedule obviously defines the amount of impact that will be experienced by the community, particularly in relationship to things that we worry about most with construction: air, noise, vibration, traffic. So yes, that absolutely, the difference of the construction scenarios is something that's required to be evaluated in the environmental document, and you should see that information when the document's released for public review.
Thank you. Now, that said, Michael, in your presentation, you talk about how quick it is to erect the beam from column to column and how many you can do in a day or a night. But you never discuss how do you set those columns. Those columns have to have footings. The footings are going to have to be deep and maybe wide. I don't know, maybe you drill piers. But how do you do them in the middle of the freeway or on the side of the freeway?
There is a construction plan and constructability report that we provided to Metro. Without going into the gory details of that, the biggest time, the sort of the critical path in terms of, because if you look at, let's say we can lift 6 guideway beams each night, and that gives you 600 feet, for example, right? The biggest time for the line is drilling the piles, because these are CIDH piles, and that's the biggest time it takes. Again, you would have multiple crews that excavate drill those holes, and then fill them with the concrete to provide the foundation for those columns. And we have both options open right now for precast or cast in situ columns. But all of this stuff for the 15 lines, we've gone through the exercise, can reliably be delivered. Again, this is a paper exercise right now, within a year and a half. So even if you want to put some guardrails around it and say 2 years, this is far faster than any other project that I've built. And again, I'm not partial to technology. I'm partial to solutions that's fit for the purpose. So my teams in the past have built tunnel programs from high speed all the way down to tram projects, etc. So it's not about the affinity for the technology. It's about what this area really demands. As Bob mentioned, what's the affordability? What's the appetite of the area for putting up or tolerating construction sort of activities that would constrain the corridor? And again, we are not blocking the 405. This will be built, hopefully, in orchestration with other programs for that corridor, like express lanes, etc. And that will be tightly coordinated and be delivered accordingly. So
Thank you.
I hope that answers, but I wanted to also give a very quick response to Bob in terms of the Alt2 We put a lot of energy, Bob, as everybody knows, without going into outside of the PDA sort of obligations that we have. We put a lot of energy in terms of developing design options purely for alternative 2. Gerard mentioned 20 plus. I had actually counted them. We were at 1.24, 25 design options, iterations of that alternative 2, in hopes of getting some sort of a buy-in from the stakeholders in that corridor. And ultimately, we came up with something that was compelling, but as Maurice said, the impacts were not exactly copacetic with respect to the other alternative 1 and 3. So I wanted to say that we didn't do that in a vacuum. In terms of the information flow, I'm not going to comment on that. But thank you for allowing me to comment on that point, because it's a serious point.
Thank you, Michael. Good questions, Jeff. Thanks. Maria, do you have any?
I do. Thank you for the presentation. It was lovely. And my questions are not technical. They're just kind of things that I'm wondering about. One is, how noisy is this monorail? If I'm standing with somebody and talking to them and this passes by me, can I still hear somebody talking, or is it pretty loud?
Great question. I get that asked a lot. And without, again, sort of going on a perceived sales pitch, I'm not interested in selling anything at all at this point. It's about giving options to LA, to Metro, and to the Angelinos in terms of what they could have. So we've developed these options. And in terms of monorails, again, I'll give you the sort of the generic version of that without going too techy in terms of DBAs and all that. It's close to an electric bus passing you by. And again, noise is very much, it's measured on logarithmic scale, and it's very much distance sensitive. So every time you double the distance from the noise source, the noise power drops off by half. So this is going to be elevated somewhere around 40 to 35, 40 feet above the ground. It's going to be in the I-405 corridor predominantly. So I think the expectation that everybody could have, and we've got the data that we can provide later, we provided some noise reports to Metro. These are going to be drowned in the traffic noise that you have already with 405. So hopefully, when this project is wildly successful and there are no cars because everybody's riding the monorail, you would be able to hear it. But until that day, I don't think it's going to be perceptible.
Okay, interesting. And let me ask you, I'm always confused. When you say people mover, is that a monorail as well? When it, like your people mover to UCLA, is that also a train line, or, you know, is that what a people mover is?
Yeah, it's just the differences and the idiosyncrasies of the technology. It all comes back to the propulsion and the wheel to, let's call it, track or the guideway interface that really differentiates APM from a monorail. It's very much in the same class. If you look at it, the vehicles that you see at LAX or other airports, they're typically APMs. And again, they have different characteristics, and they are, you could use an APM for a high capacity system, depending on how long and the train is and what's the headway. But typically there is a limitation in terms of the upper end of what the capacity is. So APMs typically fizzle out around 10,000 passengers per hour per direction. Monorails, I said earlier, they can go up to 50,000 and so on and so forth. So in terms of the perceived passenger experience, that's hardly any different. And there's a speed element as well, I forgot to mention. So yeah, they are trains.
Got it. And my very last question, when I look at the monorail behind you, the image, is a car the area between the two vertical black lines? So there's 100, can be 100 people in that section.
Correct. So the image, I'll get out of the way, that's showing a 4-car consist So that train could carry 400 passengers effectively, according to the way we're calculating for this project.
Great, thank you. That's my
These
question.
are articulated so they can move around and all that around the tight curves.
Right, right. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Maria. And Michael, that was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. I'm going to read the questions. We did get 2 anonymous questions. I thought I blocked those out. I don't like to have anonymous questions. If someone's not willing to put their name down, I typically don't even read it, but I wasn't smart enough to click the right button on Zoom, and a couple of them got through. But I'll read these and make a comment once in a while. The first one is from Adam Esser, and it says, in Albuquerque, this company built a monorail that broke down so much that they took down the tracks and now run buses where the monorail was supposed to be. They haven't been successful at building a working monorail. SkyRail is paid for by the Chinese government. I've been studying monorails now for 7 years and reading everything I can, and I've never heard of this. Can you comment on this?
Thank you for sharing the question. I don't really mind. Frankly, I'm not aware of any project that we've built in US before. I wear a second hat as a member of the BYD team. I am with BYD since the beginning of this project into 2021. I'm not aware of any monorail projects that BYD has built anywhere else in US. So I'm certainly willing to and happy to look into that. I know BYD had a bus project in Albuquerque that they settled, and I'm not privy to all the details.
That's correct. There was a bus, and there were some procurement problems and things with that. But
Right.
I'm also under the impression that there is not a monorail project built by BYD in the United States right now.
No, to my knowledge, again, I'm happy to look into it. And BYD has built, I think, 17 monorail projects outside of US. One of them is actually going on right now in Sao Paulo. It's line 17. Because line 15, which is also a monorail project, has been so wildly successful, they are brought in to build line 17. One other thing in terms of the sort of the segmental nature of the monorails is that they're able to be delivered in earlier phases. So if a program like this takes, let's say, 5 years, 6 years to build, I'm not going to go into our schedule. There are possibilities, again, if the client wishes to do that, and that's what line 15 did in Brazil. They actually delivered the first segment of that to revenue service. I believe it was around 2 or 3 years, less than 3 years. They opened up 5 or 6 stations, which helped prove the line, gave the passengers an experience that they could expect for the rest of it. And again, these projects, because the way Metro is doing this with a P3, it moves the risks to the best party that's able to cope with that risk, whether it's a financial risk or a performance risk or construction risk, et cetera, et cetera. So that opportunity, I hope it gets leveraged for the Sepulveda Transit corridor, whether it's us or somebody else. Again, it's going to be to others to decide, but our team has done everything and will continue to do everything to make sure we deliver a world-class project here.
That's great. Thank you, Michael. Second question is from the same person, Adam Esser, and you're going to get copies of all these questions. I do not know if Zoom's going to be polite to me this time and give you contact information for these people so that you could reply, but if they do, you'll be able to. This question is, Bechtel, who has built working subways, has a stop at UCLA, one of the largest universities. This seems superior to a more remote stop. It's not really a question because you presented tonight and have a concept alternative 3 with a stop at UCLA. So I don't think there's any more answer needed there, and we've got a lot of other questions.
I would just add that this is not a competition as far as I see it. I mean, it's a PDA process. There could be a nature of that PDA that could be perceived as competition. I have immense respect for the other PDA team. I have done through my teams, not individually. other technologies. So I'm well aware of what are the benefits of all the other configurations that could be had here. It really comes down to a perspective that we're trying to share with Metro and LA, that what else can be done here.
Excellent. Now, here's an anonymous question, and I think you answered most of this. Why monorails have been around a long time with varying degrees of success, what is BYD's track record specifically? And then it goes again into this Albuquerque project, which we just decided really is a non-question. Because I don't believe it exists, and neither do you. Could you just talk about your track record a bit?
In terms of the BYD projects, we're happy to provide it to whomever the 17 projects that I've referenced that they've built. Bearing in mind that BYD as a transit entity, they've really been in the business for around less than 2 decades. Literally, all the people that I know in the office that we have in Pasadena, they started out around 19 years ago with the company. They've gone through, again, I'm not taking any credit for it because I wasn't there when they did it, but they've come up with battery technology that's very unique, very safe compared to none. They basically have surpassed Tesla. I'm reading the public news that's available in terms of the electric vehicles, the road vehicles that they produce, and the list goes on. They're producing around 19 patents a day, I'm told. So for a company that's fairly young, they've accomplished a lot. And again, that should be celebrated by our American standards because we're all for innovation and everything else. That should not be necessarily put down. But again, if somebody has a different view, they're welcome to it. I don't share the same view.
Okay, we're going to have to keep the answers a little bit shorter probably because I've got, we're up to a few more questions now. This is the same anonymous attendee. Unfortunately, won't be able to send the last one anything because they signed it anonymously. How do you address the fact that the subway will have a higher capacity and frequency as cited by Metro? I want to make a comment on this. That's an untrue statement. I have been studying this for 7 years. I've got the Metro numbers. I saw the Bechtel presentation, and I've seen this presentation, a version of it before. The monorail, people have to be very careful talking about capacity versus ridership. The monorail, as it's designed, has 35% higher passenger capacity in passengers per hour per direction than the subways. That's a fact that was presented in a chart at Metro's January 9th, 2023 public meeting, although they just presented the numbers and you had to actually calculate the passenger capacity. So the question is not true. I think what a lot of people are mistaken is ridership, because I know Metro is now claiming that the ridership will be higher on the subway. However, ridership is based on modeling, and I have personally asked Metro CEO Stephanie Wiggins for the modeling, specific modeling assumptions that were made that resulted in the ridership analysis. And she refused to give them to me. So I personally, just as a personal thing, not the Sherman Oaks homeowners, but I personally do not trust or believe Metro's ridership analysis and am ignoring it. But I do believe simple calculations that show the passenger capacity is 35% higher for the monorail versus the subway. And it also says high capacity and frequency. Higher frequency is good. The monorail has higher frequency and higher passenger capacity than the subways, just as a point of fact. Do you want to comment on any of that?
That gets into the sort of the murky area of what I'm allowed to talk about as a PDA member, et cetera. But
I understand that, which is why I said something, because I'm not governed by.
Yeah, but in general, I can second what you said. A model is only as good as its assumptions. And if you favor a particular parameter more heavily, you would get a different answer if you favored it less.
I suffered through the widening of the 405, And at one of the on-ramps, Metro made a great presentation. I was on the Community Advisory Committee for the 405 widening project, and Metro made a presentation of the ridership or passenger car simulation of an on-ramp near my house, and said, we've done this, the on-ramp will never be clogged again, ever. And it was clogged the week they opened it. And now it backs up 3 miles from the on-ramp like it always did. So modeling assumptions are very important.
Just a comment, Bob. In the transit world, there's 2 primary drivers to ridership. It's frequency of service and reliability.
Yeah.
The frequency of the service that we have modeled here, when we plan to operate, is 2 to 3 minute headways. That's a game changer in Southern California and within the metro system. We have the red line, which I take often. I took it for 10 years going to work. At peak, it was 10-minute headways. This is
I took it too.
Yeah, so this is a very different type of system than what we have in the metro system currently. And that alone is going to help drive ridership. Because you walk up to a station, there's going to be a train there.
Yeah.
And then off you go.
This is a question from Jason Wally. I am excited about this, but will there be extra space built in cars for bicycles?
Yeah, just to answer that, yes, there is space designated for bikes and scooters and such. But again, just as I mentioned before, it's all about frequency of service. So, when I'm on the red line, I have my scooter there and bikes just come in and they stack up in that section. On here, there's a train coming every 2 to 3 minutes. So you're going to be constantly moving. So it's a very different opportunity to enjoy that mobility option of bringing a bike or scooter on board.
This question is from Maureen Levinson. It's quite long, so I'm going to paraphrase it. She says, I attended the Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council Bechtel presentation last month. There was a big push to connect by heavy rail with the UCLA campus. I think public transit best use would be to connect the people mover at LAX. Personally, I don't want to go to the UCLA campus. I want to get to and from LAX. When this connection with LAX was addressed with Bechtel, the presenter stated it was a phase 2 and Metro wants to solve the phase 1 aspects. Can you make any comments about this? Michael or Mark?
I will make a very careful comment about this because it's really not part of this PDA. What Bechtel said is true. We're not supposed to be talking about it, but the construction time, Bob, is the operative thing. So again, there's environmental clearance. There's a lot of stuff that if phase 2 to LAX were to be considered, have to be done. But the construction times, everything will apply to that. And based on today's dollars, because these projects never get cheaper over time, based on today's dollars, you can literally do a linear extrapolation of where we are in terms of cost to be able to reach that to LAX. However, in terms of the construction, if the connection to LAX were to be done at the same time that the contract is awarded, I would submit to you that our team could build the entire connection from Van Nuys to LAX in the same schedule, more or less, that we would do for the phase 1 to Expo. Why do I say this? Because that just requires additional crews to concurrently build those segments as we would be building for phase 1. So this is something that, again, only a monorail technology can claim, whereas the traditional guided rail vehicles cannot, especially if we are in a tunnel or viaduct environment.
Great. This is from Bob. I don't have a last name. How will anticipated work on the I-405 Express Lane project impact and be coordinated with the project discussed tonight?
I will let Gerard take a stab at
Sure.
it. He's an expert in this.
Yeah, thank you very much. So as just to inform everybody, Metro is looking at 2 parallel projects who are fairly going simultaneously. So Metro is looking at an express lane project from the I-10 to the 101, which is what the question is referring to, which is studying a range of alternatives. One is converting the existing HOV lane between those limits to a managed lane or an express lane. They also have other alternatives that are considering converting the existing HOV lane out, plus adding one additional HOV lane or express lane in each direction within those limits as well. So the way we've designed the guideway and the location and the stations is to not preclude the express lane project. So both projects can move simultaneously. Obviously, there are advantages to building the projects together where you're in the median at the same time. So there's unique advantages in construction staging and impacts on the freeway and so forth. But those are just two distinctly parallel projects. They have two environmental separate documents, but they're both considering each other as far as the environmental analysis and the design. So we coordinate with them heavily, and our guideway is situated such that we don't preclude the express lane project at all. We can work together on those and build both at the same time. Or Metro could build both at the same time.
And I
Thank
would
you.
just like to, if I could just add something to that really
Sure.
quickly for the public. When the draft environmental impact report's released, you're going to see an analysis of each of the alternatives, each of that are being carried for detailed analysis. And you'll see the direct effects of what it would take to build each one of those projects. And then in addition, because Metro is simultaneously contemplating the Express Lanes project, you'll see a cumulative impact analysis of what would the impacts look like: traffic, air quality, noise, time of construction, if both projects were undertaken, whether they're sequenced or if they're both undertaken at the same time. So you'll be able to see the difference in the effects of either one of each individual alternative, or whether that alternative is undertaken in conjunction with the Express Lanes project.
Yeah. And just to add to that, Bob, just from constructing in the median, the monorail, you can see the columns, and the technology really is looking at probably a 6 to 8 foot wide or 6 foot to place the columns. All the other structure is underground. So that's really our impact within the median, is to look for an ability to have about a 6 foot wide median, additional width in the median, to be able to locate our columns if we're in the median of the freeway. Once we go outside the freeway, then we're more flexible in the size of columns, but we can use 6 foot diameter columns, and that's really all the construction segment we need, obviously, in the final configuration.
Thanks, Gerard. This is again from Adam Esser. So the west side gets underground monorail stations and the valley gets above ground stations. I want to make a comment on this. A lot of people aren't familiar or haven't taken the time to understand all the concepts. Yes, the monorail has above ground stations everywhere on alternative 1. On alternative 3, 3 of the 8 monorail stations are underground and the rest are above ground, but they are along the 405 right of way, if I understand it correctly. The later part of this station says, well, just build the subway. Well, the answer is, be careful what you ask for. The subways are not all subways. Bechtel is designing 2 concepts. One's called Alternative 4 and one Alternative 5. Alternative 4 is a subway that is underground on the west side and under Sepulveda Boulevard. The Alternative 6 is being designed by the environmental contractor, which I don't understand, but that is the same kind of a full subway, but it's under in the valley, Van Nuys Boulevard. But Alternative 4 is not a subway at all. Alternative 4 is underground on the west side, under the pass, and it goes above ground at Sepulveda and Valley Vista in the valley and runs above Sepulveda Boulevard for 5 miles. And I'm tired of hearing people say, ooh, it's such, we'll have a subway. If Metro selects that option, it will not be a subway, and point blank screws the valley just like they did on the Red Line, where we were supposed to have one that went all the way out to Canoga Park instead of stopping in North Hollywood. So Alternative 4 is not a subway, and everybody needs to know that. It's not a subway in the valley, and it's not quiet trains running near the 405. where the noise will be blocked out. It's running above Sepulveda Boulevard and running in front of apartment buildings that are there. So I'm just kind of dismissing that question. Andrew Haas, along the 405 between UCLA and Ventura, where would the track actually be? To the left, right, or in the center of the freeway? Michael or Gerard?
Sure. Sure. So if you can provide those limits again, I just want to be clear.
You just said to the left, right, or in the center of the freeway.
Yeah. So we do
between Ventura and UCLA, Ventura Boulevard and UCLA. So over the hill.
Over the hill. So over the hill, up to the Getty, we're generally in the median of the freeway, and then we go off for the Getty. We go to obviously to the west side, where Getty is providing space for a dedicated station. Then we go back in the median all the way up to the Galleria area, where we go off to the side again on the east side and connect to a station that would be located right next to just south of the Galleria. And then from there on, we would stay on the east side of the freeway for the remainder of the project until we get to the rail corridor, the Los Angeles corridor, where we make that dogleg right. At that point, we're going just skirting south of the Los Angeles corridor, the rail corridor there. And again, one of the benefits of the technology, just to add a little bit to the prior question, is we can surgically place this technology within the roadway. So what we've done through these couple of years is try to minimize the impacts to local streets, properties as much as possible, any major utilities and other conflicts. So we do veer back and forth a little bit on the corridor to be able to miss some of these key areas that we want to avoid. So a lot of thought and evaluation has gone into how we situate the guideway alignment to be as least impactful as possible.
Thank you, Gerard. This question is from John Burke. Will Metro have parking available at the monorail stations? And if yes, for how many vehicles? Also, will they have pickup drop-off areas for Uber, Lyft, taxi, like the Laxit system at LAX? Michael?
Yeah, I can tell you that, Michael. So every station is going to have pickup and drop-off area, whether it's Uber, Lyft, or connecting to bike, ped, other transit modes. At these transfer stations where, let's say the Van Nuys station or the Orange Line or the G Line, where there is existing parking at the Expo, there is an existing parking garage that is currently used for the Metro system as well. Those areas that have existing parking, will be maintained. For the other stations right now, Metro's policy is not to provide additional parking or take properties for additional parking. It's encouraging the use of other modes, pickup and drop off, ride sharing, and other elements to be able to get to the stations. So we're not necessarily adding new parking structures or large lots. It's really working with the existing system that we have, that Metro has for the corridor.
Thank you. We had a prior question, which I missed, from Jason Wally. Another bike-related question. I wouldn't want this to slow down the process, but since you have to create space for the bases of those rails, can you leave some space for bikes to travel there too?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, again, it just goes back to my prior point is we've located these on the side of the freeway. It's really not conducive to, I think if I understand the question, is adding a bike path parallel to the monorail, if I'm not mistaken. But it's really, we've surgically placed it in areas where we're not impacting local streets, we're not impacting that local circulation, but providing that access directly from the stations. So I think if I understand a question, it's really not physically possible to do that.
Hey, this is again from Bob. During the I-405 widening project over a decade ago, the work done for pilings caused shaking and vibration that was felt by residents. How are you addressing construction activity impacts on residents and organizations such as the Getty, daycare, and the church?
Sure. Yeah, so one of the construction techniques that we're proposing is we're not hammering in piles, if people are familiar with some of those foundations. As Michael mentioned, the CIDH, or the cast-in drilled holes. So all the column foundations are going to be drilled holes that are going to be. So it's less vibratory than, let's say, hammering in steel piles or things like that. So that's a critical element, and we're very cognizant of it as well. So in those sensitive buildings or other elements, what the construction process is to have monitoring, have different noise and vibration sensors and things like that, because the contractor is very sensitive to that. We don't want to cause any damage to any adjacent buildings. There's other building protection techniques that are used. So we try to minimize the vibration as much as possible. We try to minimize the noise as much as possible, emissions, dust, and things like that. So all those will be taken into consideration when we're building the guideway.
Okay, thank you. A question from Adam Esser again. Nobody wants to see an overhead track. Ultimately, there isn't a way to beautify that. Speed of construction does not outweigh the long-term legacy for such a large project. I have talked to a lot of people, and I disagree with that statement. It's an opinion, it's not fact, because the people I've talked to, many have said, I like the monorail. Many have said, I like the subway. I do not agree with that, so I'm just stating it to be fair, but I don't think there's not a valid question in here. It's just a statement which doesn't happen to be true. The only thing I will say is true, that nobody I've ever talked to wants Bechtel's damned elevated tracks along Sepulveda Boulevard in the valley. And I've never met one person who has. And so I'll just state that. Oh, this is from Bob saying my full name is Bob Blue, and not intending to be anonymous. And I've got his email address. So I think we're done with all the questions. If anybody has another question, please type it in right away.
Bob?
Yes,
May I ask a question?
you certainly may, Jeff. That gives us a good break for somebody to type an extra one in if we want.
A comment was made that once you go north of the Galleria, the monorail is going to go on the east side and the shoulder of the 405. Why would it not stay down the middle of the 405 as you head north and make your right onto Raymer or onto the final bend?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We looked at as well. That's an option. You can do both, but going in the median north of the 101 presented some really challenges as far as some of the existing interchanges that are there, and reconfiguring. Basically, we would have to reconfigure the whole south side of the freeway to be able to accommodate, even though you think 8 additional feet is not much, but given the tight constraint of the 405, it would have a design disruption to the freeway as well, significant. And there is a potential also for Caltrans or other agencies extending the express lanes beyond, or HOV lanes beyond north of the 101. So all those were taken into consideration and evaluated of why we chose the alignment we did. But it's just more to do with the disruption of the freeway. We're trying to avoid that as much as possible.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We got 2 more questions, so I'm glad I asked. This is from Gail Polovi. I am concerned about graffiti that will deface the columns of the monorail. Has this been considered?
Gerard, you want to take a stab at it, or I can?
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a concern. It goes well beyond graffiti. That presents safety and provisions to monitor for that, and we have systems that could alert the operation control center or the asset people that are charted with safeguarding those kind of things. So yeah, those will be details that will be embellished even further as the design process continues.
Thank you. And one last question from Anne Maria, sir. I'm going to comment on this one because I think she's actually referring to something I said, but I'll have you say something after that, Michael or Gerard. You mentioned higher frequency of monorail versus subway. What is the difference in the speed between the two? I never mentioned speed because frequency really has nothing to do with speed. Frequency is how many trains go by a given point per hour. And the number that they talk about is headway, which is the time between trains. So if I understand it correctly, Michael and Gerard, the headway for your project is 2 minutes. In other words, one train comes, another one comes in 2 minutes, which means there are 30 trains passing a point in an hour. I forget what the subway is, but I think it's 2.5 minutes for the alternative 4 and 5 for Bechtel. I think it's much slower than that for alternative 6, but speed doesn't factor into that. But do you want to comment on the speed of yours versus subway, or just speed in general? Because I think that's a good question that was brought up.
Yeah, I'll be happy to chime in. Certainly Gerard can add to anything I may miss. As I said before, for full transparency, the travel time, I'm not touching the speed, because you have the vehicle design speed, you have the line speed, and you have the average travel time and all that stuff. So what matters to the passengers is the travel time when it comes to these kind of conversations. The travel time for the monorail is going to always be longer because we incorporate those difficult turns in order to have something that's constructible above ground, meaning cost and time, that's more palatable. So we trade off regularly the speed or the time of the travel marginally. Again, these are all meeting Metro's stated requirements for less than 30 minutes end to end. And that's one factor. So I want to be absolutely transparent about it. When you have a straight alignment that theoretically, again, I'm not comparing to the other PDA team, that's not really my business, and I don't know their design intimately. When you're on a straight alignment, the vehicle can go pretty much to its top speed along that route if other factors don't force it to be slower. So in a curvy alignment, like we have when we insert this to the fabric of the city in LA, we are going to inherently be negotiating some of those curves. So the train, whether it's our technology or somebody else, anytime a transit vehicle goes through a curve, regardless of its diameter or radius, they're going to slow down for safety reasons. So I want to be very careful that we are talking about the journey time or the duration of the travel from one end of the line to the other. And you can do the Pareto analysis, how many people go end to end, and does a few minutes really matter? It's a matter of personal opinion and choice. I won't tell you mine. So that's one factor, but the vehicle speed, monorails are designed to be able to go as fast as 75 miles per hour. Do we go 75 miles per hour end to end in this alignment? No, for those reasons that I mentioned. The geometry of the alignment sort of limits how many stations you've got, how much dwell time you have at the stations. That gives you the overall journey time.
So how much time do you have to get off?
During peak hours, they give you somewhere between 20-30 seconds. That's an operational consideration, and in order to do this thing. Also, Bob mentioned in terms of how many trains you can operate in a given segment of the line, and that's a discussion about signaling, because that signaling is all about safety. How close you can have trains traveling one after the other, and that brings in the braking distance and those kind of things. So you want to have a safe operation. Most of these driverless systems are designed theoretically to operate down to 60 seconds, but in practice, the lowest they operate is 90 seconds. In this case, we have even a margin over that with 2 minutes. So rather than 90 seconds, which is a minute and a half, we've proven that monorail is not capacity limited as a technology. Now, what is the catchment and what's the travel time? All those things go into the broader consideration to give you a viable, functional network that is safe.
Michael, thank you so much. We don't have any more questions. I wish I could clap, but you can't hear us on here, so it won't work. But Michael, Mark, Gerard, May, and Marie, thank you very much. the Metro people who assisted on this, Iman and Nikhil, thank you very much for staying through this. I think you've heard it a few times, so I can understand. And Jeff and
Not a
Rick,
problem.
thank you. I do want to tell everyone that this is being recorded. This has been recorded. We will process it tomorrow morning, and we will post the link to this recording on our Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association website. And that website is www.SOHA, SOHA 914. So it's SOHA914.com. And on the homepage in a couple of days, you will find a posting for the link to watch this video so you can tell your friends about it. And it will include the Q&A so it'll include everything from the beginning to the end. And I really want to thank everyone for spending the time with us and taking your time, and everyone in the audience, thank you for hanging in there. We had a few people drop off, but not many. So I think this was just terrific. And if I stop coughing here, a lot of people will watch it online too. So that's great. And I'll make sure, Michael, that you have a link for this also.
Thank you very much, Bob.
The
On
video.
behalf of Laser, we're immensely grateful for the time and the attention and the energy you guys are giving this project, and ladies. And really, the credit goes to my incredible team. They make my life a lot easier. They allow me to sleep at night, basically. So occasionally I get a chance and share some of the limelight with them. But thank you for that.
Thank you for bringing everybody. And thank you, everybody, audience. I'm going to end the meeting now.